Okay, calm down.
I've heard you speak very passionately about Biden. I've heard you say that you wouldn't vote for him. What do you think motivates him?
What motivates Joseph Biden? Well, I mean, I don't know. I don't know the man. I know what I read, and I know. I mean, I'm a trained historian. I read texts, so I can watch the body language and I can read the statements. That's the best I can do. And from that evidence, I would say several things. The first is that this is a man who still lives in the 60s. As far as he's concerned, this idealized vision of Israel is Israel to this day. The second thing I could say is he's someone who has clearly been brainwashed by the Israeli politicians and the lobbyists who have focused on him for his entire life. Starting with Golda Meir. I mean, I heard her speak once. I've seen many tapes. I heard her speak when I was an undergraduate once upon a time. Same room. I've seen her on television. She was charismatic, strange though it may be to see it. She was attractive in a certain way. She wasn't good looking, but she had a charisma to her. She was extremely articulate, very smart. And
From Milwaukee, is that correct?
She grew up in Milwaukee.
Yeah.
That's correct. She was born in what is now Ukraine,
right.
But she grew up in Milwaukee. Her teenage years. I think she arrived when she was 8 or 10 or something like that. Her American English was perfect, flawless. She understood the United States. She'd grown up in the United States, and she emigrated to Palestine, I believe, in her 20s. He has described her impact on him. So we can go on what he said. I believe what he said. He was taken by Golda. And I think he was similarly taken by a number of other Israeli politicians who, many of them are particularly adept at speaking to Westerners. I mean, look, this is a project created by Europeans and Americans. There are many Eastern Mizrahi Jews who are Israelis. So you have people from all over the Arab world, Iran, Turkey, and so on. But the people who founded it, the people who ran it, the signatories on the Declaration of Independence, are Europeans and Americans. By origin, by birth, by education, by training, by politicization, by integration into those societies before they decided they couldn't live there anymore, and they went to Palestine. So for them, for a Herzl to speak to a German or an Austrian audience, for a Weizmann to speak to a British audience, for a Golda Meir to speak to an American audience, just to talk to an audience that's her or his audience. They're not talking to foreigners, and they're not talking to a foreign culture. It's their culture. Even as they become Israelis, they're still in Netanyahu. I mean, he speaks with this perfect flat American accent. He grew up in Cornell and Philly. I mean, he lived in Israel before and after, but he's an American as far as his acculturation is concerned. So one can see how Biden will have been affected by that. And I think he has a casual contempt for the Palestinians. I mean, many of the things he's said are insulting and dehumanizing to the Palestinians. What he said about Palestinian casualties.
I have no notion that the Palestinians are telling the truth about how many people are killed. I'm sure innocents have been killed, and it's the price of waging a war. I think we should be incredibly careful. I think not we, the Israelis should be incredibly careful to be sure that they're focusing on going after the folks that are propagating this war against Israel. And it's against their interest when that doesn't happen. But I have no confidence in the number that the Palestinians are using.
So I think he's a man who decided that support of Israel was an important part of his political, persona early on, I think. And there are many statements by him. If Israel didn't exist, we'd have to create it. I'm a Zionist, and so on and so forth. This is not a casual part of his political orientation or his ideology. And I think he's surrounded himself with people like Blinken, with people like Sullivan, with the people, his chief of staff, all the people around him, a Praetorian Guard of people who think just like he does, who have a contempt for and an ignorance of the Arab world and of the Palestinians, who know and are concerned with Israeli desiderata. And who see the Middle East essentially through an Israeli lens. I mean, I sometimes would feel listening to him or to Admiral Kirby, his main spokesperson of the National Security Council.
Who's getting an expanded role, apparently. That's breaking news.
Yeah, God help us.
I know.
God help us. I feel when I listen to him in particular, but the president and Sullivan and Blinken, that they're reading off an Israeli teleprompter. They're saying things that the Israeli government, exactly what the Israeli government says. Exactly what the Israeli government says. Now, they're beginning to diverge slightly from that script, probably for callous, cold political reasons, i.e. you're going to lose Michigan, i.e. the youth vote, i.e. the black churches, i.e. Not because they've suddenly seen Palestinians as human or they understand anything more than they did before.
And what do you say to the people who, I'm sure you've heard this many times, but Trump?
Well, we're talking in this case about, as far as Palestine and the Middle East is concerned, poison and axe murder. We're not talking about a good guy and a bad guy. We're talking about two very bad guys. I'm not talking about domestic politics. I'm not talking about the deranged, demented nature of Trump's mind. I'm talking about the Middle East and Palestine. There's not one single thing Trump did that Biden undid, and he took much of it further. And Trump, maybe because of coincidence, was not in charge of and arming and financing and protecting a genocide, which Biden has been. So there's a difference between them. This one is actually much, much worse as far as this narrow issue is concerned. The second thing is, in most parts of the country, we effectively don't have a vote. I live in a one-party state. I've always lived in one-party states. I lived in Illinois before this. My vote doesn't count. I could vote for whatever, and it wouldn't matter. Democrats carry Illinois, always, inevitably. Democrats carry New York, always, inevitably. So my vote doesn't count. If I lived in Michigan, if I lived in Pennsylvania or Wisconsin, Arizona, Georgia, maybe, then you'd have a really hard choice. There's no choice for me. I mean, I couldn't possibly vote for this man, even if he changes his policy. He's guilty of all of these deaths. These are not just American weapons. The artillery ammunition and the tank ammunition that's being used today and last week and last month and next week and next month was shipped in the last few months from this country in big C-5A shipments, and without which Israel couldn't fight this war. So he is responsible for going around Congress, going around legal restrictions, in my view, violating the law, the Leahy Act and other congressional actions in the past to qualify the use of U.S. weapons in order to support this genocide. So my feelings about this man are clear. And I think that the greater opposition is registered to him now, well before the election, the greater chance there is of forcing these people to change course, which they wouldn't do if they weren't forced. I mean, the idea that they have a single humanitarian impulse is ludicrous. The idea that they care one iota about Arab life, Palestinian life is obscene. They could not have said the things that they have said again and again and again and again, had they the slightest feeling for humanity or humanitarian considerations, let alone Palestinians. But blunt political pressure might have an impact.
I heard you say something interesting about how you actually thought in some ways, well, you think that Biden's more of a true believer, a true Zionist believer, and Trump, you could see him having other considerations, less ideological considerations.
Trump has no beliefs. Trump is about Trump, whatever serves Trump. I mean, it's a little bit like the British Empire. To say that the British went to Palestine because they loved the Jews or because they believed in Zionism is absurd. The British went to Palestine for imperial reasons. Yeah, it suited the interests of the empire. And Trump, what suits the interest of Donald J. Trump is the only thing that motivates him. I mean, he would reverse on a dime if he thought his electorate would allow it. The people who keep him will maybe put him back in power and would keep him in power. He has no beliefs at all. There's no ideology motivating him except sort of a transactional ideology. What he said about Europe, if they don't pay, we won't protect them. Like that, he has that transactional ideology, and that's probably it. Besides self-interest, so I'm not saying he won't be influenced by people around him who are, full of love for Israel, his son-in-law and many other people. The kind of people he picked in his first administration are quite extreme in their absolute fealty to Israel. But Trump himself, no. And in fact, there's an account, I believe, in the Washington Post of how the Abraham Accords came about, which show it was the people around him who pushed him on and pushed them on him. He didn't care and he was skeptical. And when he realized it might be to his advantage, he went along. No, he has no beliefs at all. I don't think he knows very much, frankly, and doesn't care. I don't think he knows much about Europe or NATO. I don't think he knows much about Palestine or Israel. And I don't think he cares one bit about any of that, about the world, frankly. He cares about how he appears standing up to the world and appealing to his red meat eating base.